ever since I was born. Daddy has been the best father you could ever imagine. And I just wanted to say I love him so much.
The world stood still on July 7th, 2009. A man loved by millions, yet deeply misunderstood, was gone. But even as the music faded inside the Staples Center, one question refused to disappear. What really happened to Michael Jackson inside that arena? Voices trembled. Tears fell quietly across a crowd that stretched far beyond Los Angeles. Over 5 billion people watched, holding on to memories of a man who had once felt larger than life. He was more than a performer, more than a global icon. For decades, he was the center of music itself. And yet, behind the applause, behind the records, behind the impossible success, something had always been unraveling. Because this wasn't just the story of fame. It was the story of a childhood that never truly existed. A life built under pressure most people could never imagine. And a man who spent decades trying to become someone the world would accept, while slowly losing pieces of himself along the way. The truth behind Michael Jackson's life is not simple. It involves brilliance, isolation, devotion, and deep personal conflict. Moments of magic and decisions that would change everything. And the deeper you go, the harder it becomes to separate the legend from the man. Because what happened to Michael Jackson didn't begin at the end. It began long before the world ever knew his name. It began in a small house in Gary, Indiana. Not a place most people would remember. Just a working-class town, about 25 miles from Chicago, where steel mills defined the rhythm of life, and opportunity was hard to find. Inside a modest 2-bedroom home, 10 children shared space, noise, and expectation. And somewhere among them, the 8th child, Michael, was already different. There was music in that house everywhere, not as a hobby, but as something closer to survival. They sang while cleaning, while moving furniture, while trying to forget how small the world outside felt. But even then, something was missing. No Christmas lights, no birthdays, no quiet moments of childhood that felt safe or free. While other children ran through decorated streets, Michael and his brothers watched from the window, trying to understand why joy felt just out of reach. And at the center of it all was their father. Joe Jackson didn't believe in wasted time. To him, talent was nothing without discipline. And discipline often came with fear. Rehearsals were not optional. Mistakes were not tolerated. And silence was rarely peaceful. Michael would later remember the sound of his father's voice, the tension in the room, the way fear could sit quietly in the corner, watching everything. There were moments, he said, when just seeing his father made him feel sick. But at the same time, it was Joe who saw something no one else did. One broken guitar string, one small moment of curiosity, and suddenly a path was created. The Jackson brothers became more than a family. They became a group. By the age of 6, Michael was already performing. Not in school halls or children's events, but in nightclubs, surrounded by adults, noise, and things a child should never have to see. He watched everything. The dancers, the singers, the way people moved, reacted, lost control, and without anyone teaching him, he learned step by step, movement by movement, emotion by emotion. That was his education. But what the world saw as talent was built on something much deeper. Long nights, endless rehearsals, and a childhood that slowly disappeared without anyone stopping it. In 1965, when the Jackson 5 won a local talent show, it felt like a beginning. But it was also the point of no return, because from that moment on, Michael Jackson was no longer just a child. He was becoming something else, something the world would one day celebrate, but something he might never fully escape. And what those early years planted in him would follow him for the rest of his life. At first, it looked like destiny. The Jackson 5 were no longer just a local act. They were moving fast, from small stages in the Midwest to something much bigger. Motown saw it early. Not just a family group, but a phenomenon in the making. And at the center of it all was Michael, still a child, but already carrying something rare. His voice didn't sound like it belonged to his age. His timing, his movement, his presence, it felt instinctive, like he had been here before. And when I Want You Back hit #1, everything changed. Suddenly, they weren't chasing success anymore. Success was chasing them. Tours, television, screaming crowds, a life most adults would struggle to handle, was now the reality of a boy who hadn't even reached his teenage years. And from the outside, it looked perfect. But even then, there was a cost. Because while the world saw 5 brothers, it was becoming clear who the spotlight belonged to. Michael. He didn't ask for it, but he couldn't escape it either. And as the years moved forward, that quiet shift became impossible to ignore. By the early 1970s, Michael began stepping out on his own, not away from the group, but beyond it. Songs like Ben, soft, emotional, unexpectedly intimate, showed a different side of him. Not just a performer, but a storyteller, a voice that could carry something deeper than rhythm, something closer to feeling, and audiences responded. He wasn't just growing up. He was transforming from child star to teen idol. But transition is never simple, because the industry doesn't wait, and the expectations only get heavier. There's a moment in almost every great career where everything could go either way. For Michael, that moment came quietly, not on a stage, but on a film set. In 1977, he moved to New York to star in The Wiz. At the time, it didn't look like a turning point. The film itself struggled, failed to meet expectations. But something else happened there, something far more important. He met Quincy Jones, and that meeting would change everything. Because Quincy didn't just see a star. He saw potential not yet realized, a sound not yet defined, a version of Michael that didn't exist yet. And together, they began building something new, something that would break away from everything that came before. When Off the Wall was released in 1979, it didn't just succeed, it exploded. The sound was different, a blend of pop, funk, soul, but smoother, sharper, more controlled. Songs like Don't Stop Till You Get Enough felt alive, not just music, but movement. For the first time, Michael Jackson wasn't just part of a success, he was the success. Awards followed, recognition followed, respect followed. But inside, something else was growing. A quiet dissatisfaction, because even with everything he had achieved, Michael felt it wasn't enough. Not yet. Not compared to what he believed was possible, and that belief would push him further than anyone expected, but it would also begin to take its toll. Around that same time, something happened that would mark the beginning of a visible change. During a dance routine, he fell and broke his nose. At first, it seemed minor, an injury. something that could be fixed. But the surgery that followed wasn't just physical. It changed how he looked, and more importantly, how he saw himself. That moment would quietly open a door, one that would lead to more changes, more adjustments, more attempts to control an image that the world was constantly watching. And once that process begins, it's hard to stop. Still, the momentum didn't slow down. If anything, it accelerated. Because Michael wasn't satisfied with being great. He wanted something else, something bigger, something no one had ever done before. And that kind of ambition comes with a price. Because the higher you aim, the harder the fall becomes if something goes wrong. But at that moment, nothing looked wrong. From the outside, everything seemed perfect. The talent, undeniable. The success, undeniable. The future, limitless. But what no one could see was how much pressure had already built beneath the surface, and how close it was to breaking, because Off the Wall was never meant to be the peak. It was only the beginning. What came next would change music forever. But it would also change Michael Jackson in ways no one could undo. It didn't happen slowly. It happened all at once. In 1982, Thriller was released, and nothing would ever be the same again. At first, it was just another album, another project, following the success of Off the Wall. But within weeks, it became clear this was something different, something bigger. The music didn't just reach people. It took over. Billie Jean, Beat It, Thriller. Each song didn't just succeed. They defined an era. And for the first time in history, music wasn't just something you listened to. It was something you watched. The videos were cinematic, carefully crafted, visually unforgettable, filled with movement, tension, story. Michael wasn't just performing anymore. He was creating experiences, and the world couldn't look away. Thriller stayed on the charts, week after week, month after month. 80 weeks, 37 at number 1. No one had seen anything like it. Tens of millions of copies sold across countries, across cultures, across languages. And suddenly, Michael Jackson wasn't just famous. He was everywhere. But fame wasn't the right word anymore, because this was something else, something closer to dominance. He became the center of global pop culture, the reference point, the standard everyone else was measured against. The media said it clearly. There was Michael Jackson, and then there was everyone else. But the moment that defined it all came in 1983. Not on an album, not in a studio, but on a stage, Motown 25. The lights came on, the music started, and Michael stepped forward. Then it happened, the moonwalk, a single movement. So simple, yet impossible. The audience froze, then exploded, because they knew instantly they had just seen something they would never forget. That wasn't just a dance. It was a moment in history, and from that point on, Michael Jackson wasn't just leading the industry, he was redefining it. But success at that level doesn't stay contained. It spreads into everything. Endorsements, commercials, global deals. In 1983, he signed with Pepsi, a record-breaking deal at the time, millions of dollars. A new level of celebrity influence. Michael wasn't just selling music anymore. He was shaping culture itself. But even in that moment, something went wrong. During the filming of a Pepsi commercial, pyrotechnics misfired. Flames. Sudden. Violent. Uncontrolled. His hair caught fire, and for a few seconds, everything stopped. He suffered second-degree burns. It was an accident, But the impact went far beyond the physical, because after that, the changes became more visible. More surgeries, more adjustments, and more questions. The world began to notice, and once the world starts watching closely, it rarely stops. Still, the success didn't slow down. If anything, it intensified. In 1984, he stood on the Grammy stage and won 8 awards in a single night. A record, a statement, proof that what he had built wasn't temporary. It was historic. He wasn't just crossing genres anymore. He was breaking barriers. Pop, R&B, rock. It didn't matter. Michael moved between them effortlessly. And with each move, his influence grew stronger. But influence brings attention, and attention brings pressure. Because now, everything mattered. Every performance, every appearance, every decision. And behind the scenes, the expectations never stopped. There was always a next step, a next project, a next level to reach, even when there was nowhere higher to go. But Michael kept going. In 1985, he co-wrote "We Are the World," a song meant to help those in need. But it became something more, a gathering of the biggest voices in music, coming together under one vision. And once again, Michael was at the center of it, not just as a performer, but as a leader, a symbol, someone people followed. And yet, even in moments like that, there was something quietly unresolved, because the higher he rose, the further he moved from something simple, something basic, something human, a normal life. There were no quiet days, no anonymity, no space to just exist. Everything was public. Everything was watched. Everything was expected. And so he built something, a place away from it all. Neverland. Not just a home, but an idea. A world where time didn't move forward. Where childhood didn't have to end. Where joy could exist without pressure. At least, that was the dream. From the outside, it looked magical. A ranch filled with rides, animals, laughter. A place where children visited. Where the rules of reality seemed softer. But even that carried a deeper meaning. Because it wasn't just about escape. It was about recovery. An attempt to rebuild something that had been lost long ago. But no matter how far you go, or how much you create, some things don't come back. And while the world saw wonder, others began to ask questions. Because nothing at that scale remains untouched by scrutiny. Still, the music continued. In 1987, Bad was released, and once again, the world responded. 5 number-1 hits, a record, a confirmation that Michael wasn't fading. He was evolving, stronger, sharper, more controlled. The performances grew bigger, the tours more ambitious. Crowds filled stadiums. Hundreds of thousands watching, waiting, reacting. At Wembley, records were broken. Attendance reached numbers no one had seen before. And yet, even in the middle of that success, there was a shift, subtle but real. Because by now, Michael Jackson wasn't just an artist anymore. He was an image, a symbol, something the world projected onto. And the more that image grew, the harder it became to hold on to the person behind it. Because expectations don't stop. They multiply. They follow you. They surround you until eventually they begin to define you. And when that happens, the line between who you are and who the world believes you are starts to disappear. From the outside, this was perfection, unmatched success, unmatched influence, unmatched recognition. But perfection is often where the cracks begin. And by the late 1980s, those cracks were already there, hidden beneath the surface, waiting. Because what comes after the highest peak is never more of the same. It's something else, something harder to control. And for Michael Jackson, that next chapter would change everything. At first, it was just whispers, small questions, quiet doubts, things people noticed but didn't fully understand. His skin was changing. Not overnight, not suddenly, but slowly over time. From the mid-1980s, the tone that people once recognized began to fade. The media reacted quickly. Speculation spread. Stories grew. And before long, the narrative had already been written. That he wanted to become someone else. That he was rejecting who he was. But the truth was far more complicated. Michael was diagnosed with vitiligo, a condition that destroys the pigmentation of the skin, uneven patches, sensitivity to light, something that couldn't be controlled, only managed. At first, he tried to hide it. Dark makeup to even out the tone, careful lighting to soften the contrast. But over time, that became impossible. So the opposite happened. The remaining pigment was lightened to create consistency. And with that, the image the world had known was gone. But the world didn't see the process. It only saw the result. And once again, it judged. In interviews, Michael tried to explain, "I have a skin disorder. It's something I cannot help." But explanations rarely travel as fast as rumors, and rumors rarely fade. At the same time, his appearance continued to change. Surgery after surgery. Some necessary, some corrective, some perhaps driven by something deeper. Because when your face becomes part of your identity, and your identity becomes part of the world's expectation, it stops being just appearance. It becomes control. And control can be addictive. Then there was Neverland. From the outside, it looked like a dream, a place where children laughed, rides moved endlessly, and time seemed to stand still. But beneath that was something else, an attempt to rebuild a lost childhood, to create a world where the rules were softer, where innocence could exist, without interruption. But the world doesn't always accept things it doesn't understand. And slowly, questions began to turn into suspicion. Then everything changed. In 1993, the story spread instantly. Headlines, television, everywhere. Details were repeated, analyzed, expanded, and suddenly, the man who once stood at the center of admiration stood at the center of doubt. Michael denied everything, firmly, consistently. But in the court of public opinion, denial is not always enough. The investigation began. His home was searched. His life examined in ways most people could never imagine. Even his body was subjected to scrutiny, humiliation at a level that few could endure. And while the legal case struggled to move forward, the damage had already been done. Because reputation, once fractured, rarely returns to what it was. In January 1994, the case was settled out of court. $23 million. No criminal conviction. No formal finding of guilt. But also no closure. And sometimes, that space in between is the hardest place to live, because the questions never stop. Around that time, Michael began to rely more heavily on medication, painkillers, at first, for physical reasons, surgery, recovery, but later, for something else. Stress, anxiety, sleep, because when the noise outside becomes constant, silence becomes something you have to fight for. And sometimes, chemistry feels like the only way to reach it. At the same time, his personal life became more complicated. He married Lisa Marie Presley, the daughter of Elvis Presley. To many, it seemed symbolic. Two legacies connected. But behind the image, there were differences, expectations that didn't align. And over time, the relationship faded. They divorced, quietly, but not without consequence. Because even personal choices became public discussions. In 1995, he released History. And in many ways, it wasn't just an album. It was a response to the media, to the accusations, to the way the world had turned on him. Songs like Scream felt raw, defensive, almost confrontational. Because for the first time, Michael wasn't just entertaining, he was pushing back. But even that came with a cost. Criticism followed. Controversy continued. Nothing was simple anymore. Not even the music. Years passed. And just when it seemed like things might settle, they didn't. In 2003, a documentary aired, Living with Michael Jackson. At first, it was meant to show the truth, to let people see him as he really was. But what it revealed sparked something else. Conversations about children, about boundaries, about behavior that many didn't understand. And once again, the media exploded. Shortly after, new accusations emerged, this time more serious, more detailed. Charges were filed. The case moved forward. And in 2005, Michael Jackson stood in court, facing multiple charges. If convicted, he could have spent decades in prison. The trial became a spectacle. Cameras, crowds, constant attention. Every movement, every expression. Analyzed, he appeared thinner, more fragile. The weight of everything was visible. Witnesses testified. Stories were told. Some supported him. Others accused him. And for months, the world watched, waiting, judging, speculating. Then the verdict. Not guilty on all counts. Legally, he was cleared. But emotionally, the cost had already been paid. Because even when the system says you are innocent, public memory doesn't reset. And after that, something changed. Michael withdrew, less visible, less present, almost disappearing. He left the United States, spent time in Bahrain, trying, perhaps, to find distance, to find peace. But peace doesn't come easily. After years of pressure, at the same time, financial problems began to surface. Debts, loans. Neverland, once a symbol of escape, became a burden. Parts of it were closed. Staff went unpaid. Assets were at risk. For the first time in decades, the man who had generated billions was facing instability. And yet, even then, the world didn't look away, because Michael Jackson was never just a person. He was a story, and people kept watching to see how it would end. In 2009, he made an announcement. A comeback. This is it. A series of concerts in London at the O2 Arena. At first, it was supposed to be 10 shows, but demand exploded. Tickets sold out in hours. More dates were added. More anticipation. Because despite everything, people still believed, still wanted to see him, still wanted to feel what they once felt. Michael prepared intensely. Rehearsals. Every day. Precision. Perfection. Even after everything, he was still chasing that standard. Still trying to give the world something unforgettable. But behind the scenes, his health was fragile. Sleep was difficult. The body, exhausted. The mind never fully at rest. And then, on June 25th, 2009, everything stopped. Michael Jackson collapsed. Cardiac arrest. Attempts were made to revive him at home, then at the hospital. But it was too late. He was 50 years old. The cause, an overdose of propofol, combined with other sedatives. Medication used to help him sleep. Something so simple, so ordinary, had become fatal. And just like that, the story changed. From controversy to tragedy, from questions to silence. Because in the end, no matter what people believed, or argued, or doubted. One truth remained. Michael Jackson was gone, and the world was left to make sense of everything he left behind. In the end, the noise faded. The headlines slowed. The arguments became quieter. And what remained was something far more difficult to define. Not just a career, not just a controversy, but a life that the world is still trying to understand. Because Michael Jackson was never just one thing. To some, he was a genius. To others, a mystery. To many, both at the same time. He changed music. He changed performance. He changed what it meant to be a global artist. But perhaps his greatest impact wasn't just in what he created. It was in what he revealed. The cost of fame, the weight of expectation, the quiet damage that can build behind a perfect image. From a small house in Gary to the biggest stages in the world. He gave people something unforgettable, but along the way, he lost something he could never get back. A childhood, a sense of peace, a place where he didn't have to be Michael Jackson. And maybe that's the part that stays with people. Not just the music, not just the performances, but the feeling that behind all of it, there was someone still searching, still trying to become whole. Because in the end, it was never really about being the king of pop. It was about a man who spent his entire life trying to find something he lost at the very beginning. And maybe that's why his story still matters, because it reminds us that success doesn't always heal what was broken first. For those who still believe stories like this matter, this channel is for you.